Next, I'd like to introduce you to Ashley Winton, a partner at McDermott, Will and Emery. Ashley's practice focuses on global data protection and privacy, information governance, and cybersecurity compliance. His team has been in the forefront of data privacy regulations like CCPA, GDPR, and most recently, Schrems 2. I've asked Ashley to join us today to share his expertise on our second business challenge, data privacy and compliance. Ashley, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's great to be here, Charlie.
No, thank you. So let's jump right into it. I feel like everyone has finally just wrapped their heads around GDPR and CCPA. I think most people have just heard about Privacy Shield for the first time with the context that it's being removed. Can you briefly explain what was a Privacy Shield?
As you know, we've got this crazy strong law in Europe, currently called the GDPR. The law says that you are not allowed to send data from Europe to another country, perhaps some lawless place like America, unless certain tests are made. And that is because if the data goes freely to the States, which it can do so, it could be processed there in a way which would infringe the European law, and the results could be sent back. So to prevent that from happening, there are certain restrictions or controls that must be met before data can go to the States.
Yeah.
And to make that easier, a system was introduced called Privacy Shield. You self-certify under it, and when you self-certify, companies can receive personal data from Europe in compliance with the GDPR, the European Data Protection Law. Or they could until this case last week.
So with that being said, what should companies be doing to get started in the process moving away from Privacy Shield?
So it's going to depend upon who you are. Now, there's about 5,300 companies who were on the Privacy Shield list. You're bound to know if you're one of those.
Yeah.
If you are one of those, then clearly, with all of your customers in Europe who transfers data to you, you've got to find an alternative basis or mechanism for allowing that data transfer to take place. And the most likely alternative is something called standard contractual clauses. You need to put those in place between you and your customers. But there's a second class of company to bear in mind. What happens for those European and multinational businesses who transfer data or who use the services of service providers who formerly had Privacy Shield certification? Now, for that class, and there's tens or hundreds of thousands of companies in that class, it's a bigger question, because technically, if you look at the law, it's the responsibility of the exporter, the European company, to make sure they get this bit right. And so the case goes on to say that if you're going to use the standard contractual clauses, this standard contract I mentioned a moment ago, then the court said you must make a case-by-case assessment to make sure that the contract works for you in your circumstances. And for many companies with many different suppliers, or indeed their suppliers, their subcontractors, there is a lot of paperwork to examine, to check to see whether these contracts are used, and if they are, how the assessment should be made.
That's so fascinating, because I never thought about it in the reverse, and that ripple effect of not only the suppliers but their partners to do so, especially with that ruling. That's going to just add in another dynamic. It's going to be another thing the corporations have to deal with in themselves. It could be almost double hit on some of these things from there.
And I'll give you two further examples of how slightly more complicated than that. The first is it could be anyone in the supply chain. So you think you're using company A, but they have subcontracted part of the work to company B, and it's company B that used Privacy Shield. You might not know that, so it needs some investigation. The other quirk is that the rules, the US bulk surveillance rules, which were at issue in this case, apply to American companies' operations regardless of where they are. So if you have an American corporate that owns a data center in Europe, then using that data center can bring you within the subject of these US bulk surveillance laws which the European court didn't like. So 2 further cases to bear in mind.
Man, those network architecture diagrams have become really important tools. So, I want to close out with something just more, leveraging your expertise and experiences. What are some of your predictions for like the future of data privacy? And ultimately, what can our corporate audience be thinking about and start practicing today?
Well, you need the crystal ball, so let me just get that and polish that to get a nice shine on it. So, for many years, I think people wondered whether the European standard for data protection law would be the worldwide one. And we've seen that perhaps in the CCPA. I am not sure, and this Schrems case we've just had reinforces this, I am not sure the European model is necessarily the best one. And the reason for that is that if you go back to our discussions about intangible asset value, the more that you can use or exploit data, I would argue, indicates the greater value it has. And therefore, you could argue that in regimes which are more permissive for processing data, i.e. where data protection law is weaker, it's in those countries you can get a higher intangible asset value for that data. So it makes no sense to adopt a kind of a global, worldwide, European type tough standard, because you'll end up less successful than your competitors in being able to exploit that data.
It's so fascinating because it's almost turned into how much data do we have to how do we manage our data, starts becoming the competitive advantage, just given the variances of regulations, by key locations.
And I think companies should set their own standards, set their own level. Obviously, in countries where the data laws are tougher, you've got to, anticipate that. But set your own standard. It's going to depend upon the type of business you are, so the work that you do, your profile with the regulators, your ambition to make money from your data, a whole bunch of factors. But you need to fine-tune your own standard and not just accidentally adopt the European tough standard on a worldwide basis. That will not make you as competitive as you need to be in this current environment.
Yeah, it's that whole short-term versus long-term problem solving. It's a really great point. Well, Ashley, thank you so much for spending the time with us today. Super excited to keep working with you on these challenges and really excited for our corporate audience to get the chance to hear you speak as well. Really appreciate it a lot. Thank you, Ashley.
Charlie, good to see you again. Thanks.
Thanks so much for watching. Please be sure to check out the link below to get started on our Schrems 2 demo use case package that McDermott, Will, and Emery helped us create. A special thanks again to Ashley for joining us today. We'll see you in the next one.